Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird. Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Episode 263, Dream Telepathy. We're going into your head while you sleep and trying to talk to you. Wendy, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you, Mike? I
am hanging in there on a long Monday night. It is 9 p.m., September 9th. So it's 999.
2019.
So I believe this is a lucky 9 podcast.
All right, cool.
And it is Allison Jornland's birthday today.
Happy birthday, Allison.
Yeah, my sister, we were trying to get her to come on at 999, but she's at a sweat lodge today. So she's doing something cool in there. She's like, oh, I'm a sweat lodge. I'm like, all right, have fun. I hope she sees something unusual in all the heat and everything and has a spiritual experience herself.
That'd be awesome.
It would be awesome. All right, but today we want to talk just a little bit about dreams. Wendy, when's the last time you had a dream you remember?
Last night.
Okay.
Well, I don't really remember all of it. My dreams tend to come back in bits and pieces. And the weirdest part of the one that I remember from last night was just a hot air balloon crash landing in my childhood home front yard. So analyze that.
All right.
How about you?
I had a dream last night that we were going to play a show, and it was at a venue I didn't like.
Uh-oh.
But actually, it's a venue that didn't exist. But in my dreams,
okay.
I'm like, oh, this dump. I hate playing this place. Anyway, I wasn't going to get dressed until before the show, so I was completely naked setting up.
Awesome.
And it really was
nice
weird.
work.
I was just like, because I was like, oh no, I was trying to make it like, well, I don't want people to see my show outfit or whatever beforehand, but like we were setting up and everything, and I was just naked. And it was like that dream when you go to school and you're naked.
Yeah.
Like,
or you show up for a public speech or something like that.
Right. But it was like that. And then, but nobody seemed to think it was a big deal except for me. Because like in the beginning, I thought it was a good idea. And then I was like, oh man, I'm sitting here at this bar, like trying to get a beer before but while we're setting up or whatever. So I'm like sitting there, I'll get a beer before the set, or I'll buy a pitcher or something. And I'm just buck naked.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mike, as your bandmate and a good friend, I promise I won't let that dream come true.
All right, thank you.
If I see you without clothes, I'll give you a heads up to do something about that before the show.
Throw a blanket on me. Do something. Be like, right? There's gonna be a blanket in the van. Just throw the blanket on me and be like, there you go. Anyway, so you had hot air balloons crashing.
Yeah.
And that's a classic kind of dream that you could interpret as maybe I felt unprepared to play.
Yeah, sure.
Or I felt naked and vulnerable because we're playing at a place that was a dump that I never wanted to play again. But if we stopped playing at places that were dumps that I never wanted to play again, we wouldn't play shows.
Our career would be over.
Right. We wouldn't have a music career, period. So, but it's that kind of interest in dreams. Like we're sitting there going, what can they mean? What can they be about? And I mean, I think the modern scientific interpretation of dreams is that they don't mean a damn thing. It's just random neurons firing.
Yep.
Or maybe sometimes you are trying to figure something out in your head. We've talked about lucid dreaming before, and I've gotten much better at lucid dreaming lately.
Oh, yeah?
Well, what happens is you might be able to hear one of my cats moaning in the background here of where I'm talking.
Okay. I was wondering if I was hearing some kind of a paranormal
beastie
signal coming through. Right.
No, I wish it was
it's an actual beastie.
It's an actual beastie. But what happens is, since my wife wakes up early in the morning to go to the gym or whatever, and I wake up a couple hours later when our 3-year-old wakes up, what happens is once she wakes up to go to the gym, in walks in the cat, and then just meow, meow, like right next to me, like on the pillow, on her pillow, will just sit there and meow at me until I wake up, pet him for a few minutes, and fall back asleep. But he's like a lucid dreaming clock.
Oh, cool.
So what'll happen is when I fall back to sleep, immediately that's when I'm going to have a dream I remember. That's when I'm going to have it also helps if I'm not drinking the night before, because alcohol interferes with our delta. Well, when you first fall asleep, after you're wasted or whatever, you immediately
fall into that deep, deep sleep.
You do for a couple hours, but you don't get the healthy REM sleep where we're dreaming.
Right.
That's like the rebuilding kind of sleep anyway. And then after a few hours, you'll wake up and have trouble falling back asleep. But so if I've not tippled the night before, then it's not too bad till I fall back asleep after I pet the cat for a couple of minutes. And that's when immediately I'll go into a dream, like it'll be something I remember. And because I knew I was just awake, and because this has happened now at the house we've been at for the past 5 months, now it feels like, because it's like, okay, I'm dreaming.
You're aware as you go back in.
Right. And so like today, like halfway through the dream, when I was buck naked at the show, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm dreaming because I'm not usually this stupid. And also, if I was sitting there naked ordering a beer, the bartender would be like, hey, hey, I can see your Johnson. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Right? This is not, we don't live in some hedonistic, this isn't Europe. We have to wear clothes when we play.
It's funny you said that it's been within the past like 5 months, because I've also had within the past, 6 months to a year, probably, I've also gotten my lucid dreaming has gotten much better.
Ooh.
It seems like, because I hit snooze a lot on my alarm.
Sure. Hey, no shame in that game.
And I don't know what has changed, but I just started noticing that when I hit the snooze button, I go back to sleep. I've been returning into the dream that I was having beforehand. And so same as with you, after this happening a few times, then I started becoming more conscious of it and paying closer attention as I was like, oh, I wonder if I can get back in there and see what's going to happen, when I do wake up. So it's kind of fun. I haven't really done anything with it other than to notice it and kind of...
You haven't tried to fly or anything yet?
I haven't yet, but maybe I'll make that a goal.
Yeah, give it a shot. Whenever I figured it out, I try to fly. This last dream, I didn't try to fly because I didn't want my wang blowing around the wind or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, oh, that's going to be uncomfortable.
That's great.
I should at least get a cup or something if I'm going to fly.
Yeah, not very aerodynamic.
No, not at all. So I just I'm not going to fly on this one. But usually I try to fly or do something cool. And then there's the whole idea of when you kind of are feeling yourself coming out of the lucid dream and going to awake, you try to spin yourself around. And that's supposed to keep you... That's supposed to keep you inside the dream. Because a lot of times when you're dreaming, your body will try to wake you up.
Okay.
These are the kind of things that they talk about at one of the places we're going to be discussing today, the Maimonides Institute. It was a sleep institute that was developed in the 60s in New York City. And they had done experiments in lucid dreaming, dream telepathy, originally because they want to understand the state of dreaming better, because it's, because everybody's sleeping, it's hard to study it.
Yes.
But also, they have nightmare therapy there. So they do things where they try to help people work through, people that have horrible nightmares, especially people that have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and they've got horrible nightmares where they keep on reliving the experience.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that would be difficult.
So now it's cool that they developed the whole nightmare therapy. And you could tell that, especially when that institute was developed, there's going to be a ton of guys with PTSD because of how many people served in the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
So you have guys that are 10 years later, shell-shocked and still having the same dreams about fighting the Germans or the Japanese. And so this idea of helping people kind of control their dreams, understand their dreams better, that, the next step in that is that if we can start figuring out what's going on in our dreams, we can start figuring out if there's any kind of paranormal activity in there.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So You remember Inception?
Yes, I do.
It's kind of old now. Like, it feels like an old, like I think about
it does.
Inception. You're like, oh, that's kind of an old movie. It's not that old. It's not even 10 years old yet. But that was one of my favorites, I think, of even the past 20 years. Not only because of the special effects were awesome in it. It was just such a cool idea.
Yeah.
The idea that not only could you suggest dreams to people to make things happen, but you could also go in there and convince people to do things inside their dreams. And also, I think it's one of the first movies I saw that really got into the time dilation that happens when you are dreaming.
Ah, okay, yeah.
So this idea that, a half an hour in the dream world can be 5 minutes in real life kind of thing. Because I remember realizing that as a kid, I'd have the radio on next to me when I was sleeping. And so sometimes in the dream, I would hear a song and I would hear the entire song through the dream.
Wow.
I'd sing along to it or hear the entire song. Huh. And then when I woke up, so let's say this was one of those days in 6th grade or something where I was snoozing, and at the last 10 minutes, I'd fall back asleep. And when I woke up, the song would just be on the first verse or something.
Huh.
So I'd hear the entire song and go through the entire song in my head.
Wow, that's cool.
And then when I woke up, I'd hear the song again. I'm like, this thing again.
Doesn't this station play anything else?
Same crap. Come on now. But Inception really got that right, I think, where time happens differently in dreams. And it's because our consciousness, when you think about the way our consciousness experiences time, there's some theories about it, but that when you're in a fight or flight kind of situation, the first thing people say, or people are in a car accident, they're in something where they're in some kind of life-threatening incident. The first thing they say is, it was like time slowed down. And they go into, they felt like 15 seconds was 10 minutes kind of thing. And so the way your brain, not just your brain, but your consciousness processes time is different depending on the neurons that are firing, depending on the adrenaline that's shooting through you. And so there's no reason then that we think of when the consciousness is not interpreting external stimuli, but interpreting internal stimuli, that it will process it at whatever speed it wants to process it. So, if I'm talking to you and you say some words to me in the physical material world we're out here, and plus, we're dealing with one thing beyond consciousness. We're dealing with computers talking to each other over distance, and then our consciousness processing that. So I have to wait till your words go through the computer and they hit my eardrums or whatever before I can figure out what you're talking about. But if we're all producing these things ourselves, then our consciousness just it processes it as fast as it can.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why dreams have a completely different, something that can feel hours long in a dream. Or, sometimes I feel like I wake up from a dream and I feel like a character I created in my head or whatever is someone that I knew my whole life.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I knew them for, a half an hour.
Right.
And when you dream up a person and it really can, you can create someone in your head and you wake up and you I'll never see that person again. And you miss them.
Isn't that funny?
Right. And you're like, I'm missing someone that's not even
an imaginary
real.
Friend.
Yeah, I'm a loser.
Nice.
I've got real friends, and here I miss the fake ones. So I think, Inception really kind of gets that. And it's funny that the guy that, wrote Inception, Christopher Nolan, he originally came up with that idea 10 years before he made the movie. And they didn't have the technology he didn't think was there to make it. And it took him 10 years, and he made the Batman movies in between and whatever to get the whole idea together and then put the movie together. So they not only do things in that, they show that consciousness processes time differently while people dream. And then it shows that dreams can be suggested. And, people, they use the science fiction device of this little box whenever that helps suggest people's dreams, and then they can go in there with them. So that's the real science fiction-y part. Not only that you can suggest a dream to someone and it'll happen, but then you join them in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the first movie to do that. We've talked about Dreamscape before, which is the first PG-13 movie. Or it was one of the first PG-13 movies, but it was also that showed us the idea of other people being able to invade your dreams,
right,
and to go in there and join you. But the thing is, like, Dreamscape wasn't the first movie that came up with that idea. People have been this idea that dreamland is somewhere where we can talk to people like
it's a world,
normal world,
basically.
Yes. It's somewhere else we're visiting. When we talked to a dream expert last year, he was going off and saying like, well, every time you go to a dream world, you're going to a parallel universe. And that got a little much for me because I'm like, all right, well, then all these other, I have plenty of nightmares. So these parallel universes suck.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be visiting that world. You would choose to go elsewhere to a different world. That's not unpleasant.
And it's completely against modern science, this idea that when you're dreaming, you're actually going somewhere outside of your head and not just dealing with internal desires and troubles and maybe just your neurons firing randomly. In fact, speaking of neurons, we'll stick with the hard science portion of this for a second before we start moving into the ESP research that they've done, where they have tried to create shared experiences with people dreaming. And they've tried to use dreaming as an altered state of consciousness to maybe make you more open to ESP. Not you particularly, Wendy. Not yet. We're still going to work on that.
Right.
We're still going to give that a try.
Disappointed.
But just the idea of like, okay, well, here's the stuff we can prove, and then here's the stuff that we're still working on. So, this is from a couple years back, and actually, so 2015. And it's an article that's like, studies show that Inception is possible, at least in sleeping mice. And so I thought that this was like a fascinating study. And the Industrial Physics and Chemistry Higher Education Institution in Paris.
Okay.
What their scientists did was they placed electrodes into a part of the mouse in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus has electrical signals in specific places that represent specific places. So if I'm in my bedroom, my hippocampus has a cell that fires when I'm in that place. It's for location. It's for like knowing where you are. It's for familiarity. And so it has a specific neuron associated with it. I'm in my basement right now because that's where cool guys hang out. No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure.
And no, I'm in my basement right now because that's the least echoey part of my house. And I'm still working out the details of the new house to figure out a good room to record in.
Studio.
Right. To turn it into a big party studio where I can record alone. But the idea is, so we have these parts in our brain that will fire when we're in certain locations, and they're in the hippocampus. And so what they did was they would monitor the mice that have electrodes in their brain and monitor them when they were in a specific area. And so the scientists were able to locate the specific cells that fired in those locations. So they knew that these cells would only fire when they were in this certain place. All right. So when the mice were sleeping, the electrodes in those certain place cells, which they called them, would still fire. So they were showing that the mice were dreaming about these specific places. So what the researchers did was they would use the electrodes to then send a reward signal to a different part of the brain when specific locations they were dreaming about. While they were dreaming about those locations, they would fire off the reward signal.
Okay, that's cool.
So what it would do is would create a positive association with that place while they slept.
Okay, so if they were watching your brain, Mike.
Yes.
And they saw you go to the refrigerator and take out a beer.
They wouldn't even have to fire one.
Right? No. They would just see you go to the refrigerator. Just you go to the refrigerator. and they would observe where in your brain that showed up. And then while you were sleeping, when that area activated, they would give you a beer.
Pretty much. That's exactly right. They would send positive reinforcement.
Okay, gotcha.
So while the refrigerator cells were firing my hippocampus, they would send the positive area of the brain or whatever. They'd throw in some dopamine. They would just excite.
I see.
And give you a positive. So they would technically give you an electrode beer when I went to the fridge.
Got it. Okay.
So when the mice woke, they ran directly toward the place that was associated with the reward signal.
Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah. So, I mean...
So they were affecting... The theory is that they were affecting what was happening in the dream from external.
Yeah. And then, I mean, obviously the mice can't talk and be like, oh man, I was dreaming about the fridge.
Unless it's Mickey.
Right. Mickey, I was dreaming about the fridge. I really needed a beer because Donald was a jerk today. No, but, I mean, that just idea... that's possible. Us, while we're sleeping, they can find out what we're doing, what we're dreaming about, and then they can pop stuff in there. Right now, you can't do that to humans because if you put an electrode directly on the brain, you're going to have to cut off the top of somebody's head. Like I remember at University of Wisconsin, that was something we had to check out was a mouse with an electrode, with electrodes, plugged right in their brain. And it was fairly unpleasant.
Yeah. That does not sound nice.
Yeah, it wasn't like
It wasn't like you just put a little hat on it.
No, it's definitely not like a little hat. Unless that hat revolves removing the skull cap.
Oh, yeah, no.
Right. So it's that kind of idea that something we know we can do. We know that is possible. By finding out what parts of the brain are firing. Well, they're already doing that also with parts of the brain associated with speech. And so as they're finding where words are associated in people's heads, they're using that to help people who people who are paralyzed, to help them speak, to help them communicate. And that's been something they've been working on now for several years. And every once in a while, you'll see some kind of article that comes out and blows your mind. It's like, person in wheelchair can speak through a computer and hasn't been able to talk in 20 years kind of thing. And so they are doing this kind of research in people, not quite as invasive as the mice or whatever, but they are able to tell, like speech centers, the words that people are thinking.
Huh.
Which
That's
we should all
cool.
be very worried.
Yeah, it's scary, but cool.
Right. Because, I'm thinking about wearables. You know what I mean? Like we have these smart wearables now. Like I'm wearing an Apple Watch. You're wearing a smartwatch. People have Fitbits and stuff like that all the time, just on their watch. And they wanted to make the glasses cool, right? And then that just didn't quite work. I don't know why. Because it seemed like to me that was a great idea.
Yeah, I know. I want
Google
some of
Glass
those.
never took off.
Yeah.
That they have already, think about Stephen Hawking. Like he was able to type things by just moving his eyes around.
Amazing.
So they already have stuff that's able to detect, small things in human physical. Like as soon as we figure out a way to detect where the electrical impulses are going off in the brain, and they can already do that a little bit with a home EEG kit. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too. So when the technology gets good enough to get super precise about where things are going off in our brains, they're going to be able to read our minds pretty quick. Yeah. So it's not just privacy that I'm worried about. It's that people will know what I think about them.
Right.
And then I will have no friends.
They'll know the truth, Mike.
Right. As soon as they're like, oh my God. Or just people know what I think in general, and I will have no friends. So technology is not that far off, but the idea of us being able to share a dream together, now that is still pretty far off. So the world of Inception, where you just, you get a suitcase in the same room and sneak into somebody's dream, or in Dreamscape, they just did it through massive ESP powers. That's not quite there yet. That doesn't mean that people haven't believed they've been able to share dreams, for all of history. The Maori, the people of New Zealand, I mean, they believed the dreamer's soul could travel to the land of the dead and talk with their friends who'd passed.
Mm-hmm.
The indigenous people of Borneo, they had special spirits of the dead who came to visit them during their dreams. And, a lot of North American Indians, too, also had this idea that they could connect with other people at faraway distances through their dreams. Now, these things weren't done in any kind of scientific thing. It was just this idea that sometimes you'd see somebody who you knew in your dream, if they were dead or alive, and you felt like you were connecting with them beyond the usual dreamscape.
Okay.
So, especially shaman and medicine men who were more connected with the spirits and more connected with the idea that the soul can leave the body, had this idea that you could have dream telepathy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you guys don't know what telepathy is, you're listening to the wrong podcast.
Nice.
No. If you don't know what telepathy is.
We do talk about it a lot.
Right. It's this idea that you can talk to people with just your thoughts. So telepathic means when you're empathic, it means that you can detect another person's emotions. When you're telepathic, it means you can directly communicate what they thought. So it's like a telephone, talking on a telephone, but your telephones are your heads, and you're not using your voices.
Right.
And so, that's been mostly all anecdotal evidence through time. The Society of Psychical Research, that's basically the people that invented parapsychology in the modern era. That was something that they tried to broach in their book, Phantasms of the Living. And they've got 149 cases of dream telepathy. And they called it extrasensory communication of impressions of any kind from one mind to another. But everything was very anecdotal. So, here's an example that they use in Phantasms of the Living. My brother and father were on a journey, and I dreamt I saw father driving in a sledge, followed another by my brother. They had to pass a crossroad in which another traveler was driving very fast, also on a sledge with one horse. Father sent it to drive on without observing the other fellow, who would have driven over my father if he had not made his horse rear, so that I saw my father drive under the hooves of the horse. Every moment I expected the horse to fall down and crush him, and I called out, "Father, Father," and woke in great fright. And the next day he discovered that his brother and father were on a journey, and they did pass a crossroad, and his dad almost got hit by the horse.
Wow, interesting.
So, that's what most of the stuff they talk about in Phantasms of the Living is all anecdotal things.
Yeah, not verifiable.
Right. We've had an anecdote like that in my family where my cousin, or the man who's married to my cousin, all my cousins are a lot older than I am because my mother was 20 years younger than her sister, and she had kids 20 years later than when her sister did. So my cousin, he told me this story probably when I was maybe 16 years old or something, and he was already in his late 40s. And he was talking about how his father had passed. And, I was talking about how ghost stories and things, and he's like, well, I didn't really see a ghost, but the night before my father died, I had dreamed that I was, in this white room with my father, and my brother was there, and my father was telling us it was okay that he passed, and that, he was no longer going to be in pain, and he, told us to take care of ourselves, and he'd always look over us, kind of thing. The kind of thing you usually hear about when you think about a comforting apparition of someone who dies saying goodbye. And when he talked to his brother the next day, his brother brought it up and said, I had a dream about you both last night. We were in a white room, and Dad was talking to us, and he was saying it was okay, and he was, that we should take care of ourselves or whatever, and that he would watch over us, blah, 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 kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, man. So not only did they have a ghost dream, they both had the same dream. So it was a shared dream with their dad,
That's
shared
really
ghost
cool.
dream. And That's the kind of stuff that people talk about in the Phantasms of the Living book. Because it's, usually the characteristics are, number one, it's someone in imminent danger. So it's very much like a crisis apparition. A crisis apparition is when people will see a ghost of someone they love who is maybe far away, but they see them during when something horrible happens. A lot of people will talk about crisis apparitions happening when their mother's in a car accident or something, or their sister, and they'll see a ghost of that person in their house, or they'll see the person pass through their house when they shouldn't be there, and they realize at the same time that was happening that the person was in the car accident or whatever, or they'll get a phone call from them and they'll just talk about nothing for a second, like the person will just wanted to check in on you. Like, okay, everything's cool. Like, okay, well, I'll talk to you later then. And that will be some kind of like regular phone call they'll get, but that person will have been either in the accident at the time or in the ambulance.
Yeah, that's spooky.
On the way home. So, it's usually the dreams concern something of death. It's somebody who's related or a friend of them. And usually, a lot of times, it's people who don't have psychic abilities or experiences in other parts of their life. So to them, this is a big deal because they're not someone that usually has a psychic encounter. So they've been studying, dream telepathy. It started in the 1800s. It's kind of when they first got it in there. That's probably the first time they called it telepathy. Sigmund Freud talks about it. In 1921, he writes like an entire thing on the occult and psychoanalysis. And he's got a paper on dreams and telepathy, and he was going to lecture, actually delivered as a lecture, but he never actually did. But he did write it up. And so Freud was obviously interested in dreams because he's basically our modern guy for dream analysis. So the idea, when Freud developed psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud did it in the early 20th century, he's saying that we can cure people who are mentally ill by talking about their problems. They called psychoanalysis the talking cure. And when, in the past, when people had mental illness, they just, they shoved them in they gave them a lobotomy, or they shoved them in an institution, or they considered it weakness. They didn't consider it a sickness in that kind of way that could be, they didn't consider it a sickness that could be cured through talking. Now the idea of talking to a therapist or whatever is normal because we've had 100 years of Sigmund Freud. So, well, actually now the psychiatrist is not going to talk to you. He's just going to give you drugs.
Right.
But that's because they don't have time to talk to you anymore.
Right. Yeah.
15 minutes.
The budget only has that much.
Right. So here's a chemical shortcut. Right. Here's your beer when you go to the fridge. But Sigmund Freud, he didn't necessarily believe in telepathy and dreams, but he thought it couldn't be proven or disproven because he talked to people about their dreams constantly because that was part of his cure was, what are you dreaming about? And then he'd always relate it to sex because that's what Freud did, because everything to him, every problem that people had had to do with some kind of sexual dysfunction or some kind of sexual desire that wasn't being satisfied. Or so he based most of his talking cure on, well, we got a sexual problem here. But your dreams aren't going to be any different. And so he himself said that he had two potentially telepathic dreams. One was a dream of the death of his son, and the other was the dream of the death of his sister-in-law. But he said, well, I don't think they're telepathic because I just think that I was expecting them to die or worried that they were going to die, and then they died shortly after.
So your mind was already kind of working on that while you were asleep. And
right. If you dream about the death of someone that's terminally ill, you wouldn't necessarily call that a psychic dream. You would just say, I'm dreaming about somebody who's terminally ill. But, he did think this. So he talks about this. He wrote a paper on it. People still study Freud. I studied Freud in college. And we would have professors who were psychoanalysts who grew up in the Freudian tradition. And so this idea that he was down, at least with thinking the idea that telepathic dreaming, and it could happen that people could communicate with each other through their dreams, he's at least okay with it. Whereas if you talk to a psychiatrist today and he tries to write something up about telepathic dreaming, they're not going to publish that in Psychology Today,
Right.
let's say. So Freud brings it up. Then in the 1940s, they start studying it again. In fact, there's some studies done in the 1940s that people are seeing as in the lab. They're saying that people were able to actually accomplish telepathic dreaming, and that they were able to send messages to each other and interact in the dreams. But the papers didn't really, the papers weren't really respected. They were accepted by a couple of different journals, but the fact that they became more controversial than anything, and nobody was able to replicate them. So, the biggest thing that they were able to do was start using REM monitoring. This is the best thing that came from those studies, even though they weren't really able to prove anything when it came to, obviously the idea of a study is not necessarily to prove that you can do psychic crap in your sleep, but they were useful in saying that, okay, when people are in this rapid eye movement state, that's when they're probably dreaming.
Makes sense.
So then, these studies in the 1940s, they started being like, okay, well, here's how we'd actually study how people dream. So in the past, you would just have the Freudian way of, I'm telling Sigmund about my dreams, or you're telling a psychical researcher in the 1850s or whatever. You'd be like, oh yes, sir, I had a dream that my father was going to be run over by a horse. And then the next day I found out that it was really happened. So it's not like when you study REM, because in REM you can see, okay, the eyes are going, they're dreaming. Mm-hmm. You can wake them up right after. So you start eliminating that whole day where also you can forget your dreams, because they always say if you want to be a better dreamer, not necessarily a lucid dreamer, a better dreamer. Well, I guess if you have a lot of nightmares like I used to have, then being a better dreamer would be not being attacked by things in your dreams.
Or also maybe being able to remember your dreams better. Because we don't know if there are nights where you wake up and you don't remember dreaming, that doesn't mean that you didn't dream.
No,
right?
That's right. No, that's exactly right. It's just because my dad, I'd be like, hey, Dad, what do you dream about? And he's like, nothing. He just stares like nothing. I'm like, well, don't you? He's like, don't you remember your dreams? He goes, I don't dream. I'm like, come on. He's like, no, I don't remember any of them.
Oh.
And so it's got to be the kind of thing where you got to write it down. You got to practice it. So I always say, to remember your dreams better, or to be more involved in your dream life. Let's say, we talked about the Aborigines before and the rich life that the Australian Aboriginal people have in their dream. That's developed from a young age because they are taught how to remember their dreams, to talk about it, to treat their dream life like it is a different world that you visit. Yeah. And whether or not it's a different world you visit, it's still cool to be able to do stuff in your dreams.
Yeah, it's fun.
or even if it's not just horrific, even if it's not just you naked at a bar and feeling self-conscious, even if I could just manifest some underwear, it would have been better.
There you go.
A Speedo would be fine. It would still be less awkward than just having the bait and tackle out there. And that the thing is that if you can
bait and tackle,
if you can start doing that a little, it becomes, your dreaming experience can be more pleasant.
Yeah. And you can even work on things in your life that you want to contemplate, or, they say if you can get a handle on the lucid dreaming, it's a place where you can do that might give you some insights that you wouldn't normally have in your waking life. Yeah,
because people have been able to write songs in their dreams. I have yet to write a song in the dream. I have had snippets of a rhyme.
Nice.
And I'd write that down, or I'd have a song title.
Oh,
and I'd be like, oh, here's our new song.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, oh, that's a cool name for a song. When I woke up, I'm like, I write that down so I don't forget it.
I have melodies for sure. I wake up with a melody in my head sometimes.
And you can just sing it. And I mean, very famous people have done that. Because your mind's still working.
Mm-hmm, right.
And, I don't want to solve problems all the time in my dream because I'm sick of like solving problems in my day life.
Yeah.
That I want to be like, oh God, the dreaming is the only time I can be naked in a bar.
Yeah, but there's a difference between, it's kind of how they say meditating helps you with that kind of stuff too, because it's like
that's right,
a clear place. You're out of your daily problem solving type situation, and then that can allow you to look at things maybe deeper, or I don't know.
That's right. No, I agree with you there, and you're also completely looking inside.
Right.
So, when we talked about psychic experimentation before, the most repeatable results have happened during what's known as the Gansfeld procedure, and they even do this when they talk about the what's it called, the Stanley? Is it the Stanley method?
Oh yeah,
right. Where it's sensory deprivation. You put the ping pong balls over your eyes. I don't know why it's always ping pong balls and not just a blindfold.
I think it's because they look creepier.
They do look creepy. And
no, actually, it might be so that it kind of diffuses the light, makes it like an even, instead of just having darkness over your eyelids. Sure. There's still like light coming in, but it's even. I don't know.
Well, no, that's right, because a lot of times in the Gansfeld, they'll actually, but the ping pong balls also have a red light over.
Oh, okay, so there you go.
So it's no like real visual sense because you're just getting one color of everything, and maybe also so you don't have to shut your eyes so hard and think about it. But the idea is that sensory deprivation, and we talked about this in the whole episode of flotation and the sensory deprivation tanks, which I highly recommend because they're totally awesome. But putting people in sensory deprivation, this idea where you don't have any external stimuli to distract you, that's the idea, is that puts you in a better state to be receptive to messages.
Right.
And when are you more internally stimulated, I was supposed to say, than when you're sleeping?
Right, those synapses are firing.
The only thing that's firing at what's in your head, and it's only coming from the stimuli that you create or are influenced. You can't be influenced by anything that's outside your body. And so now, in the 60s, that's when they really start getting into dream experimentation. And so there's a guy named Montague Ullman, Tracy Ullman's dad. No, it's not Tracy Ullman's dad.
Nice.
Really awesome it was. But Montague Ullman, first of all, is a great name for a scientist.
That is pretty sweet.
And he starts working at this Maimonides Institute. And he starts getting into using EEGs and seeing how the brain waves are going, what parts of the brain are firing, during sleep. So they start being able to use EEGs as a way to find out where people are in the dream cycle.
Yeah.
And so they can be like, okay, this guy is in REM. How do we know? Is it because are we sitting there staring at his eyes?
Right. You have something that's measurable that you can take a note of. Right.
And remember, the 60s is a really groovy time too.
I don't remember.
Okay. But when we're talking about the 60s, we're talking about an era where, people are, the new age is upon us. We're coming upon the age of Aquarius, the summer of love, and not, and we talked about hippies in I guess this summer specifically, because we were talking about Charles Manson a bunch. We've talked about them in a pretty negative light because, the proto hippie ended up being a murderer. Mm-hmm. But also, hippies were great because they helped us see things from a different perspective, introduced new kinds of spirituality into society.
Right, and it made it kind of almost acceptable.
Right, and these new ideas were able to get in there. So Montague Ullman starts working with Dr. Stanley Krippner, Stanley Krippner's still alive. And he's got a great episode of Joe Rogan, if you got 3 hours to listen to it or whatever, where he talks a little bit about this. But Dr. Krippner, first of all, Dr. Krippner's from Wisconsin, so, shout out. Even though he lives in Oakland now, did most of his research in New York. But they start doing these dream experiments. They start getting in telepathy, and they actually do research with the Grateful Dead.
All right, now we're talking.
Yeah. So it's funny because, you know, he was like friends with Mickey Hart, the drummer of the Grateful Dead. So Stanley Krippner was friends. And when they were doing some of these sleep experiments at the same time, people were also doing experiments with LSD.
Yeah.
And a lot of these bands were doing LSD. Number one, because, I mean, acid rock, that's where the ad name comes from. And it's also legal. So it's not, I mean, you could buy LSD in the back of magazines. So when we think about this now, if you were doing LSD and embarking on a some kind of psychedelic experience, like the DEA wasn't going to blow your door down because it was just like drinking a beer or whatever. Well, except you might spend 8 hours in a fantasy land.
Or a nightmare.
Right. And the Grateful Dead were really into psychedelics, obviously. That was like their name. They came up with their name while they were all like tripping or whatever. Like their name was the Warlocks.
Sweet.
Or something. And so they were all at one of the guys' houses, and they needed to find a new name other than the Warlocks. And this guy had a big Oxford dictionary. They opened it, and then they saw the words Grateful Dead like juxtaposed. And I don't know how they saw it juxtaposed because G and D are different. But several of them at the same time saw like the Grateful Dead, and it looked like big black he said, big black letters edged all around in gold, man, blasting out in me. Such a stunning combination. So I said, how about the Grateful Dead? That was it.
Okay.
And so they were used to these kind of, you know, experiments. And so what Stanley Krippner wanted to do is, because he knew these guys and he was also friends with this medicine man who was kind of controversial because he might not be a medicine man. But he was born in Oklahoma and claimed to have Native American heritage. He had said his name was Rolling Thunder. That's what he called himself. And so he was always really into these kind of experiments. And he was also friends with Mickey Hart and Stanley Krippner. And because Stanley was doing this research in dreams, he wanted to see if they could, they were just doing stuff where one person was in one room and they were trying to send a message to a person in the other room. And they were doing with art. Okay. So they were just doing it with interesting art. And like you'd have, you know, a few telepathic receivers and then a few telepathic senders. And, you know, they are distant rooms of the place. But that's how they were doing their dream telepathy research. And so they were seeing some interesting statistical results, which if you guys don't understand how statistics work when it comes to science, it's a methodology where you can take, if you have a big enough sample of people, then you try to run a bunch of numbers to see if you can apply it to an entire population. And so, you know, the kind of experiments they were running is, here's one example that Krippner writes. So this obtained a statistically significant result, and you have a randomly selected art print that is The School of the Dance by Degas, which is a dance class of several young women. You guys would recognize it if
the ballet dancers, right?
Yep. And so the receiver's dream reports included phrases of, I was in a class maybe made up of half a dozen people that felt like school. There was one little girl that was trying to dance with me. And so that this idea that, okay, like they had, you know, one person sending this picture by Degas, and there was the people were just writing what they dreamt about. And so one person dreamt about school with half a dozen people, and the other person dreamt about girls trying to dance with them. And so once they like put it all together with the amount of things that people decided that were statistically significant, it was like, all right, well, let's try to repeat this experiment. And so they would have several experiments that actually seemed to work, still not in the way that's a home run like we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like we want to talk about where, Wendy, you go to sleep tonight and I'm trying to send you, I don't know.
At this time of the night, I'm going to send a lightning strike, bright flashlight into your dream. And then you see the brain light up at exactly that time.
Right.
Where you think the person should be perceiving it or whatever. Like you want something very measurable, very exact, and that doesn't rely a lot on the person's own perception of it, right?
That's the home run.
Yeah.
Saying like, I've dreamed something about lightning is not necessarily the home run.
Yeah.
Well, at least it's something in there. But so what they tried to do was in 1970, they were having a rock concert that everybody at the rock concert was the telepathic senders. And so they had a light show that accompanied the music, and they had a projector up there where they could show slides. And so what they did was they showed a color film about eagles and their nesting habits on the movie projector. And the program for the slide projectors featured various birds from around the world, as well as a phoenix. And then the Rounders were the band who was playing at this rock concert in March of 1970. And the song was called If You Want to Be a Bird.
Okay.
All right. So what are they trying to send? Bird, 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 bird. There's 5 volunteer telepathic receivers, each located in a 100-mile radius from the concert's location in Manhattan. All 5 of the participants were told the location of the concert and directed to record their images at midnight, at which time the target material would be exposed. So one of the receivers had the impression of something mythological like a griffin or a phoenix. The second, third, and fourth research participants reported images of a snake, grapes, and an embryo in flames.
Ooh.
Jesus.
Oh, jeez.
The 5th participant was Richie Havens, the celebrated American singer and recording artist. So it was a musician as the 5th participant. And he reported closing his eyes at midnight and visualizing a number of seagulls flying over the water. So 2 out of the 5 people got pretty close.
Yeah. Although that's a pretty small sample size, and a bird is a pretty, universal image. It's pretty,
But they didn't tell him what it was. But I mean, the fact that it was a bird.
Yeah.
And so the next time they try to do it, in February 1971, they get the Grateful Dead to do it with 2,000 people in the audience. And then they get 2 people in there as telepathic receivers. And one of them is sleeping at the laboratory. The other woman she's sleeping at home. But she was awakened by telephone from time to time during the night and asked for dream recall. So they would wake her up and then have her tell her what she was dreaming about. And so this is the cool thing, is that they've got this 6-slide sequence facing, the audience. And the 2,000 people see you're about to participate in an ESP experiment. In a few seconds, you'll see a picture. Try using your ESP to send this picture to Malcolm Besant. Malcolm Besant is one of the guys. Okay. So they pick his name, right?
Uh-huh.
He will try to dream about this picture, try to send it to him. Malcolm Besant is now at the Maimonides Dream Laboratory in Brooklyn. So they're saying where he is. They're saying his name. We want you to send it to him. And there's no cell phones or anything like this. This is 1971. And then they randomly select an art print to show on the screen. And the members of the Grateful Dead, they talked about it a little bit, and they told him send the image to Brooklyn. And so this idea was, what would happen if 2,000 people were sending the message all at the same time? Mm-hmm. Would the guy be dreaming about it? So then what happens is they had the dream transcripts, and then they gave several judges copies of the 6 art prints selected for use in the study. And this whole thing, they did this for 6 different nights. And so the judges would look at the art prints and then look at the dream transcripts and see how close they would have gotten. And they said, it wasn't, this great, super example. It was basically, the results were only one of the nights seemed to be that close for both of them. So they got close out of both of them. And it said that maybe the results were 12 out of 100 in chance. So every 100 times they did this, maybe 12 times, that chance would happen that they would both get those correct, close to the prints in their dreams. So you really couldn't determine if 2,000 telepathic transmitters were better than one.
Okay.
So that's kind of
inconclusive.
And we had the same problem when we tried our own dream telepathy experiment.
Yeah.
And so we tried to do something similar at State Fair this year, because I was doing a investigation that night. Allison and I were doing an investigation that night, and it was based around if someone who was sleeping in a haunted place would see some extra haunted stuff, or they would see things or hear things that were related to the hauntings in their dreams. Well, we tried to do it. We also tried to replicate the experiment. Now, it wasn't at the same time. It was later on. So we were sending it to the future during the show.
Yeah, that is a different situation.
But during our song about Stonehenge, Mother of Time, we tried to send this picture of Stonehenge to a girl named Madeline who'd be dreaming. And later on that night, after, she never hit REM sleep. Like, because of the circumstances, she didn't.
Not ideal for the experiment.
Yeah. I don't know if she even dreamed, but this is the first time we tried it, right? And that doesn't mean, the Grateful Dead tried it a bunch of nights. We can still try it
definitely.
Again. But I showed her then 4 different pictures after she had woken up. And I'm like, which of these, did you dream about any of these pictures? And she picked, instead of picking out Stonehenge, she picked out a picture of city. And she's like, the city speaks to me. Okay. And I'm like, I wish the stones had spoken to you.
Yeah.
But that kind of idea that, all right, maybe more senders aren't better than one sender at a time. Because it seems like most of the statistically significant data and research has been done with just one sender to another sender.
Yeah.
There was one more interesting study that I thought, now, Stanley Krippner's been doing this for years, and he's super interesting. He's still alive, so we're going to beg him to do the podcast.
Hey, cool.
One of these days, because he's really interesting and smart, too. And plus, he's got rock and roll stories from the 60s, so he'd be the perfect person to talk to. So there was a very cool study done in 2013 where they were trying to see if people could dream information about other people without knowing who they are, just by looking at their picture. And so what they would do is they were shown a picture of someone that they did not know, and they asked them, we want you to go to sleep tonight, and we want you to dream about a health problem they have. The experimenter didn't know about the health problem, and the participant didn't know about the health problem. And so they had a class like 65 students, and 12 students volunteered to do it. And that was the first experiment. In the second experiment, I think another 50 did it. So they ended up having, in the end, 150 students who did this kind of thing in 3 different experiments. In one experiment, they didn't see a picture. It was just this idea of, we want you to try to dream about somebody with a health problem. In the second experiment, they saw the picture. In the third experiment, they saw a picture that was computer generated, and the target individual was fictitious. So they saw a face that wasn't a real person.
Nice.
Like an AI created face or whatever, like they do now. And they would go through, and they tried to score their dreams, and their conclusions were basically that people who saw the picture of the person and then tried to reflect about their health problems the next day in their dreams, or what they saw in their dreams, the ones that actually did dream about the person that they were trying to dream about, if they saw the picture, it seemed like statistically the results they got compared to chance, which the chance is very low for something like this because you're just guessing out loud what they could have. They did find a statistical significance in young, healthy adults dreaming details about the personal problems of an unknown individual simply by looking at their target and then planning to dream about that individual's problem. And so, we can get into, I can put a link in the show notes about the kind of these different rules they have where they analyze people's dreams. And when you go through and they have codes for things that happen in people's dreams, so then they can try to quantify it a little bit. But just this idea that just in the past 6 years, they had a statistical significance that just by looking at someone's picture and planning to dream about them, you can, more than chance at least, more than probability would dictate, you can learn something about it. So dream telepathy exists in the way of, science has proven greater than chance, but unfortunately hasn't proven anything that we can use today. We can't go out and just work on a song tonight in our dreams, which would be great because it would make this whole week a lot faster.
Oh, it'd be awesome. It would be so helpful.
It would be. But, speaking of songs, the song for today talks a lot about dreams, daydreams and fantasies, and the kind of things that you think about when you feel stuck, and you feel like you want to do something more, but you got to pick up the pace to do it. So this one's off our first album. And I don't know if we were feeling particularly stuck, or it was just one night we were talking about like the idea of being stuck in a small town and always wanting to get out. And so this song is called Running in Place.
Woke up this morning paralyzed by a dream. Stared at my window for an hour. Prayed a little for a little, then got out of bed. But then I went to work and nothing for what seemed forever. The days turned to hours, the minutes raced past. Time has this way with me, moving too fast. We danced until dawn under endless sky. But when I woke up, it had passed me by. I'm falling behind in the human race. 'Cause all of my life I've been running in place. The boys with big dreams have to pick up the pace. Oh, all of our lives will be running in place. Running in place. Oh, this room smells so old and worn and beat. I stared at my ceiling for an hour. When you have too much ambition, then it hurts like none at all. When you're praying for a sign that will never come. The days turn to hours, the minutes race past. Dreams have this way of unreaching my grasp. We danced until dawn under endless skies. But when I woke up, it had passed me by. I'm falling behind in the human race. 'Cause all of my life I've been running in place. The boys with big dreams have to pick up the pace. Oh, all of our lives will be running in place. The days turn to hours, the minutes race past. Dreams have this way of unreaching my grasp. We danced until dawn under endless sky. But when I woke up, it had passed me by. I'm falling behind in the human race. 'Cause all of my life I've been running in place. The boys with big dreams have to pick up the pace. Oh, all of our lives will be running in place. Running in place. Running in place.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Oh, it would be so cool if we could have like a lucid dream hangout with our Patreon members.
Yes, it would be. That would be my favorite thing to do, because then not only would we not have to deal with Skype and its technical difficulties,
Right. Internet.
we'd be able to use the Wi-Fi in our minds.
Yes, and we could all be like in a room together. We could all be flying around
Yeah,
together.
Think about how sweet that is. I promise I'll wear clothes, guys. I promise I'll wear
All
clothes.
right.
Anyway, if you would like to be part of a Patreon hangout in online, because we can't do it in our dreams yet, othersidepodcast.com/donate is the place where you can become part of our Patreon community and do things like the cool hangouts.
Yes. And we want to thank each and every one of our Patreon members for being so cool. And they really are fun friends that we've made.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure we thank Dr. Ned.
Thanks, Ned.
He's at the level of membership where you get the shout out in every single episode. We'd love everybody to be at the level where they get a personal shout out in every single episode. You can do that at othersidepodcast.com/donate. The rest of our Patreons are just as awesome.
Yes. And we thank you so much for supporting us and for contributing to the community that we have.
Right. You know what, guys? You make our dreams come true.
Aww.
Oh, yes, sir. I had a dream that my father was going to be run over by a horse. And then the next day I found out that it was really happened. I was dreaming about the fridge. I really needed a beer because Donald was a jerk today. This last dream I didn't try to fly because I didn't want my wang blowing around the wind or whatever.